Join us for Reimagine Buildings 25, our global online conference this June 12th, or June 13th if you're in New Zealand, Australia, or Asia. This isn't just another event. It's a global gathering of the people building what's next. We're bringing together the doers, the visionaries, and the quietly revolutionary, those who are ahead of the curve in retrofits, new construction, and the future of low-embodied carbon materials and climate-positive building systems, past, present, future. From real-world retrofit wins to high-performance new builds to the boldest ideas in next-gen materials, it's all here, one place, one time. And you won't just watch it happen, you'll be part of it as you connect with others on the same path. Show up, be inspired, and leave with clarity, momentum, and a community that has your back. Register for Reimagine Buildings 25 today, the conference where we reimagine what's possible and level up to build a future where we can thrive. Visit PassiveHouseAccelerator.com for more.
I think I read that buildings consume 50% of the energy in the United States. I mean, that's unbelievable. And if we can cut that in half, just think.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out PassiveHouseAccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm Zach Semke, co-host of the podcast, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. And Matthew Cutler-Welsh is not able to join us today, but he's going to be at the Reimagine Buildings 25 conference as host this coming Thursday. So if you're looking to listen to Matthew's excellent voice, you'll be able to take it in there. So with that, I'm going to introduce some special guests that we have. Well, not actually special guests, but co-hosts with a very special interview. Jay Fox, how are you doing, Jay?
I think I'm special.
Yeah, you are. You're absolutely special.
I'm doing great. I'm here in Asheville, North Carolina. Just got back from Boone. I was at the Appalachian Energy Summit, which was just a really fantastic conference.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it sounded like it was great. And Mary James, how are you?
I'm great. Haven't been traveling. Good at home.
Nice. And you are also special. Our special guest is Kim Davis, our programs manager at Passive House Accelerator. Hey, Kim.
Hi, extra special, I think. Great to be here. I'm usually totally behind the scenes, so it's nice to be here on the podcast today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to talk with you about the Reimagine Buildings 25 conference in just a second. But before we do, we have some folks to thank for making our work here at Passive House Accelerator possible. So a big thank you to Bewizo, who is our sponsor of the week and making everything happen for us this week. Thank you also to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you to our founding sponsors as well, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, Zolo Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050. So a big thank you to our sponsors. So we are going to be listening to an excellent interview that Mary and Jay had with Lisette Wong and Jack Esterson of Think about the Malcolm Shabazz Plaza. But before that, we want to talk with you, Kim, about this amazing conference, the Reimagine Buildings 25 Past, Present, Future conference that's happening this Thursday, June 12th, or if you're in Australia and New Zealand, June 13th. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. Like you said, it's happening June 12th This is a full day, 3-part virtual conference. Like you said, the theme is past, present, future. And the whole conference is all about how buildings can be powerful tools for climate action. So I've been meeting with our 35 speakers over the past couple months and learning all about their practices and all the incredible projects that they've been working on. And I just have to say, it's been incredibly energizing to hear their perspectives and their stories. And I'm excited to see this whole huge conference come together next week.
Yeah, we are too. And it really is incredible what you've put together with this program. You mentioned past, present, and future. Can you say a little bit about what those mean in the context of this conference?
Absolutely. So part 1 will be past. We'll hear about folks doing impactful retrofit work. We'll hear all about embodied carbon and just transforming existing buildings. That will be 2 hours of case studies. And then the third hour will be a practitioner panel. And then we'll move into part 2, present, and we'll highlight some standout projects that are raising the bar for high performance design today. And then we will move on to part 3, future, and we will talk about what's next, new materials, emerging technologies, and I guess how to really scale this all up as quickly as we possibly can.
And this is by far the biggest event that we put on every year. And this builds on the Reimagine Buildings 24 online global conference last year. And you have people from all over the world coming to present on this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a really diverse group of folks joining us from all over the world. And we'll start at 9 a.m. Eastern. But the way that it's designed is so that folks can kind of jump on wherever they are around the world and catch whatever is convenient for them. We'll also have a replay available. So if there's something that you are not able to attend live, you can see the recording. And just to mention too, for folks that are in need of CEUs, we have AIA, VS, and PHI, which we've all been approved for. So those are available as well.
Awesome. Well, congratulations, Kim, for the amazing work on this event. And I think all of us are just really eager to take it in and have it happen on Thursday, June 12th. And we hope that everyone listening will join us as well. It's going to be really amazing. I think the other thing that is cool about these conferences is that they are not Zoom meetings. These are on a robust online conference platform that allows people to connect in real ways. And there's fun one-on-one networking that you can do and opportunities for connection and community building, which I think in this moment is super important and something that I'm really looking forward to. So please join us.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that really sets us apart from some other conferences. So really, really looking forward to connecting with everybody in just a couple of days.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. All right. Well, I think Jay and Mary, you start off with a really great introduction to this conversation, but do you want to say a couple of words before we run the tape, as they say?
I think I don't know if Jack goes too deeply into the history of this market, but it's a really fascinating backstory that you can read about by going to a back issue of the Accelerator magazine. Because I did an article about Malcolm Shabazz Harlem Plaza and the history of the market, and the West African street vendors who kind of ended up getting displaced during the mid 90s and needed a place to go. They went to several properties and ultimately established this Harlem market. And so the mosque, the Malcolm Shabazz Mosque, is going to develop it now. It's going to keep the market and then build 120, I should know this off the top of my head, but over 100 units of actually affordable housing. And then you'll have the market as well. So it's really pretty fascinating story. And, Jack and Lisette were just great guests to have on.
Okay, let's listen.
Welcome back to another episode of the Passive House Podcast. My name is Jay Fox. I'm here with co-host Mary James. And today we're going to be speaking with Senior Associate Lisette Wong and Principal Jack Esterson of Think Architecture and Design. Specifically, we're going to be talking about their project, the Malcolm Shabazz Harlem Plaza, which won the Distinguished Blue Ribbon for Design Excellence in round 4 of NYSERDA's Buildings of Excellence competition. Thank you so much both for being here.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lisette, I want to start off with a question directed to you. I'm curious, what was your pathway to Passive House and how did you become a FIAS consultant? Was it before you became involved with Think, or was it, once you joined the team?
Yes, I actually went through the path of being a FIAS certified, went through the certification prior to joining Think. And if you track all the way back, I think it really, if you want to talk about it, goes back to my childhood. I grew up in summers in the Cape. I loved being on the shores. The first thing I wanted to be was a marine biologist. So, I really care about the environment, feel that we're stewards of the environment. And as architects, that's our job, not only for the buildings that we build, but for the environment. So I think it was logical. The second thing that happened was the pandemic. So that during the pandemic, it gave me time to reflect. And I was thinking about, again, doing architecture for many years, doing many different exciting building types, different projects. And I realized that two things that were very important to me was climate action and affordable housing, which therefore led me to Think, who are pioneers in providing and building a passive house in New York area as a multifamily building back in 2018. So that was wonderful to land here. Something I had decided I wanted to switch my focus in architecture.
Cool.
Great. Well, I guess this question is mostly for Jack then. How did Think get involved with the Malcolm Shabazz Harlem Plaza project?
Yeah, so it goes way back. We have a very long relationship with the Precita companies. They're the developer. They're one of a small group of affordable housing developers that really started the whole sort of business of affordable housing decades ago, based in the Bronx, third generation family business. And we started on small projects, institutional projects, and housing projects. Us as the architect, them as the developer and builder. They're a developer and building company. We just had a series of very successful collaborations. And for at least 20, 25 years. It was a very trusted, very loyal, long relationship, very fruitful relationship. About 8 years ago, the principals at Precita started mentioning this Shabazz project in Harlem. And it involved an African marketplace. And I was very intrigued. And we were very excited to hear about it. But it was percolating through all the sort of approvals, negotiations, the mosque, Shabazz Mosque, that controlled the site that we're now building on. And we were actually engaged for the project, I would say about 5 years ago, pre-COVID, actually. But it was a long road. There was COVID. There was this planning process called ULURP, which is a rezoning process that takes a couple of years. So we kind of provided support, technical support, schematic design to push that process forward. Without that, they wouldn't have a project. So, and then, COVID came, everything kind of went on hold for us. Almost all of our affordable housing projects went on hold. It was very unfortunate, I guess, for about 2 years. And then COVID kind of lifted, the Shabazz project came back. I would say that was about 2 years ago. And that's when we really started designing the project deeply in design development. And then at one point, the client started talking to us about the Building of Excellence program. This was kind of out of the blue. These are folks that are not known necessarily for sustainable development. So we were sort of surprised, encouraged, and delighted, actually. We have been through the Building of Excellence program before. So we kind of knew what we were doing and really focused on winning, frankly, because we were very excited to have this challenge. And so we worked with the client and a sustainable consultant and engineers to include as many sustainable features as we could muster. And really, and that's, I mean, that's the way to win. We kind of learned how to win these things. And so we really included many, many different features of the building, which Lisette can probably speak to in better detail than I can. But the other aspect of this project was the distinction it had in the community and what this marketplace actually meant as a legacy to this Harlem neighborhood. So that was something that was so distinctive because no one else had an African marketplace on their project. It's very rare. I think there's only one in New York City. So we made a very big deal about that. We really dug in, we did illustrations, we talked about the meaning of this marketplace to the neighborhood because it had been in existence for a couple of decades. The African market vendors were once all along the sidewalks of Harlem. Mayor Giuliani sort of banished them, and the mosque had this empty lot, and the vendors moved to this empty lot, which is our current site. And they've been operating for the last couple of decades in an open air situation. Our client and the mosque, who controls the site, came to an agreement to build a permanent marketplace so that the vendors could operate all 12 months of the year, rather than have it be kind of weather contingent.
And an important function of the marketplace is that they're also functioning as a business incubator.
That's true. Yes.
To provide support for the vendors.
So this market holds a great meaning to Harlem. Malcolm Shabazz was a relative of Malcolm X and Betty Shabazz, who holds, of course, a great legacy in the Harlem community, indeed. And the project is named after him in his honor. So there's sort of the great history of Malcolm X and the kind of wonder of these African vendors. They sell brightly colored clothing, fabric, drums, wood carvings, jewelry of all kinds, mostly from West Africa, Senegal, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, etc. And it's very popular. There's tour buses that pull up, and it's a true landmark. And so we were really excited to be able to continue that and to encourage the selling of merchandise all year round.
Great. And so has construction started yet on the project? And whether or not it started, where are they going to go during construction? The folks who are in the marketplace.
Right. So good question. Naturally, we have to house them elsewhere for at least 2 years. These buildings take at least 2 years, sometimes 30 months. This is not the simplest project in the world, and I predict it will take about 30 months. They have found a site, an open air site to move the vendors. We are creating new, they're called booths. They're kind of stalls that open during the day, close at night, to move them all back in. And we're designing about 55 stalls or booths for the vendors to return to.
Great. And Lisette, so could you elaborate on the sustainability features that were included when the decision was made to enter the Buildings of Excellence competition?
Sure. Well, what we did was to take our envelope, which was designed at code minimums, and bringing that up to PHI, be certified through PHI, to those requirements of insulation. And obviously the MEP systems had a huge overhaul. We're using second generation PTHPs, and we're using black water recovery. We're using a centralized ERP to get fresh air in the units, right? And then in the market hall, we wanted to include, we thought this would be really cool to get in passive ventilation in the swing months. However, it went through a code determination that it's like a problem with smoke purge and all that. So we weren't able to pass that through, unfortunately, but we still have these beautiful skylights, which sort of really harken on, the old shopping arcades. Because the really cool thing about our project is that it is really sort of connecting the city and livening it. It's between two streets and it's a through lot. So you can enter from West 116th, walk all the way through, underneath the skylight. So you have a connection to, the sky, and then come out at West 115th. So it's really creating another node in the city.
And we really maximized the skylights. They formerly were kind of incidental and rather small. And we just decided, let's really have a meaningful arcaded skylight system. It's very large. And when Lisette is talking about passive ventilation, we actually designed the skylights to be operable. But we did have some problems with zoning and building department. But they remain. And they're, for me, a kind of an evocation of open air, or remembrance that this was once an open air marketplace. The skylights are that big. So when you walk in, we anticipate the market will just be flooded with daylight, particularly in the middle of the block, where it's normally very dark.
Mhm.
So we hope to save a lot of lighting, of course. We also, on top of this podium, are 2 apartment buildings, which was obviously very important. And the space between these 2 residential buildings was a small garden, and the rest of it was essentially a green roof and space for mechanical equipment. But we really revised that scheme to become, the entire yard became a fully landscaped yard for the residents, with pergolas and seating and planters and a very kind of rich environment for kids and adults. There's also a walking path that circumvents the whole garden for active design.
So we're really thinking of the residents that will come in, and the locality of Harlem is actually, it's located in the highest heat vulnerability index in New York City, 5 out of 5. So creating these green areas, the rest of it's very important, not only to reduce, the heat island effect and all those other things. It creates all these areas like Jack was talking about for active design. We'll be going for Fitwell. It also, it helps find community places for the young and the old and everybody in between to meet and to speak. So it's not just about, lowering our embodied carbon or, creating these things. I think important elements of the passive houses are the people that live in those.
Well,
So these
yes.
such sustainable elements that create biophilic spaces, create people where people can prosper, right? And
I think it has a kind of a dual advantage. The garden in particular, it's very large. And we're doing 2 apartment buildings on top of the African market. And we do this often on projects that are through block lots, where the zoning kind of determines that you're usually doing 2 apartment buildings with a yard in between. So the garden was really meant, in addition to the biophilic aspects and the green aspects, as a social mixing space for these 2 buildings. So that the populations of one, populations of the other come together at this garden. We see it as a real social mixing kind of space. And a way also of avoiding redundancy with amenities. Our funding agencies require us to include amenities like community room, laundry, computer room, etc. So instead of duplicating those in each building, one population of one building can go into the other and use those amenities without duplication, and that further encourages social interaction and physical activity amongst the buildings.
Nice.
We're working with landscape designers to sort of work on the plantings and the trees and the shading, like in those green aspects of, enhancing all that.
That's great.
Really.
I wanted to just make sure. I guess I have two questions. Things may have changed since the last time we spoke, which was about a year ago. I want to know about, first of all, any PV panels on the roof, if there will be there. And then this is maybe a little separate, but will there be cooking allowed in the market, or is that still kind of an open question? I figure without the ventilation, that might be problematic.
Good questions. We are doing PVs.
Yes, so we have PV on both of the, as we know, they're the north and south segments. So those are the residential portions that are from the 2nd to the 10th floor that sit upon the market hall. On their roofs, on their upper roofs, it's a full layout. We're having it on a tilted plane array, so it's set up, and we're getting quite a bit of PV there. And as far, you can answer the second.
Well, yeah, so when we were first engaged, there was no cooking.
Mhm.
It was purely what they call dry goods, African merchandise, as it is now. There's no cooking right now on the site. But then the mosque said, well, we really want to add cooking. We want to have indigenous African cooking, cuisine for the neighborhood as an additional draw into the marketplace. We thought that was a great idea to mix food and market and dry goods. It's not been easy, I will say. We have, what, 7 food vendors? 8? We have seven or 8. It kind of fluctuates according to what month we're talking about. We do not yet have actual vendors that are going to be leasing. So we're kind of designing food stalls without a client. The client is the mosque. They are not in the business of cooking. We just, in fact, recently hired a kitchen and food consultant because it's just not really our area of expertise. We don't do a lot of restaurants and that sort of thing. And they've been great in terms of really targeting and focusing on what it is that we need. What is the equipment? How do we ventilate? As you said, Jay. And it's actually not so easy to ventilate 7 cooking stations on the ground floor, residential above it.
So I'll explain our strategy. So our idea was to allow them to have 2 commercial kitchens, and the second type, which we call a warming pantry, and then a third type, which is going to be a coffee bar. So only at the 2 commercial stations will have ventless hoods that can work in the capacity that we're working already with our, HVAC system. You can, recirculate it. We don't have to, the other way we would have to solve that is with black iron duct, which gets very complicated. So these ventless hoods are a solution for commercial kitchens. And I said, like these warming pantries, they will, they won't be putting any fumes in. Obviously, we're going all electric, so there's no gas. They'll just be warming it either with a hot plate or a microwave. And then the coffee bar will be a typical coffee bar, with espresso machines and, grab and goes for that. So that's where we are with our kitchen planning, which again, as Jack said, not having a specific food vendor on board is certainly a challenge.
Yeah, and it's quite recent, actually. It's only been a few months that they've introduced this idea of cooking. So we kind of had to redesign part of the market to accommodate that. But I still love the idea of the combination of the food and the merchandising.
And just backing up for a second, can you tell me how many apartments are going to be in the 2 residential towers? And also, I'm curious about when construction is slated to start.
Construction is slated to start in January of 2026. We're still not finished with building department of Environmental Protection, city planning, and all the agent and HPD, which is funding the building. We are still in the process of getting all the approvals we need.
So HPD is the Housing Preservation and Development, which is an agency in New York City which promotes affordable housing, helps finance it, and many other tasks. And they actually head they have their own set of guidelines and approvals that we do on top of the typical department building approvals in New York.
And speaking of HPD, I would say 8 or 9 years ago, did one of the first passive house affordable senior buildings on the East Coast. Miraculously, it got built, but HPD had never done one before, a passive house project. They didn't know, there was a big fear factor across the board. They were not particularly supportive, but our client was adamant. They drank the Kool-Aid. They were absolutely determined to do a passive house project. And without a client that has that passion, it's actually hard to get that done. And 9 years ago, it was really hard to get it done. We somehow got it done. They found the money and we built the project. And it was literally the first senior residence, I think in the Northeast or something. Forget the statistic. So it was quite a win. And I mention this only because we watch these agencies change. Because now, there's really not a fear factor anymore. I think that more and more of our clients are asking for passive house, that they're educated, they know something about it.
As is HPD.
Yeah, and so is HPD, right? And they understand the long-term advantages, particularly for nonprofit agencies that end up owning and operating these buildings, right? And in many cases, particularly homeless, formerly homeless, they pay the utility bills. So people are getting on board, and it's trickling down to the agencies, and they are not shocked anymore. In fact, I think they actually support it. In many of the requests for proposals promoted by HPD, they're now actually mentioning it and encouraging passive house design in their proposals. And if you want to win one of these, you better take it seriously. So that's like 9 years, right? And it's remarkable to see that institutional transformation.
And to answer your first question, we have 123 dwelling units, 100% affordable.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And in Haddock, we're 67 units.
Yeah, that was the project 9 years ago.
Okay. Cool. And I guess just this is switching up a little bit, but since winning and since the last time we spoke, have you kind of made any modifications to materials choices, or tried to reduce embodied carbon in any way, or have you just been focusing on getting this done and actually helped?
Well, the latter part of what you said is 90%. Yeah, we're focusing on getting it done. It's been a very long road. Anecdotally, things I'm thinking about, as Lisette mentioned, the conversion of the skylight system to a more of a traditional fixed skylight system was something we ended up doing. We have transformed the cladding of the building to a recycled brick,
okay,
which is a little challenging. The choices are not what they might be, but we're going forward.
100% recycled brick.
100% recycled brick. Sorry. I think the further development of the landscape element has been ongoing. What else have we done since BOE?
Well, there's been some changes in HPD. So they have design guidelines and they've upgraded them. So what they do is, because they fund, capital projects and these affordable housing projects, they want to look forward to how our climate is changing. So they've released, the mayor has released a CRDG, which is the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines. So they're trying to, build all buildings to be very robust, and to be long lasting. So we are now working with them. We are in an extreme stormwater flood zone of the 2080s. So those are challenges that have come to us after winning the BOE, because as we first planned our buildings, we were under design guidelines 1.0. He wasn't looking at these 2080s data sets, and these sort of benchmarks are changing as as projects take longer to get done, going through all the processes.
Well, that's really.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I think that's really interesting that you've had to look at future climate files in your energy modeling as far forward as 2080. And obviously, we're talking New York City, so cooling, I'm sure, was always part of that you were providing now, even though it wasn't in the past. But can you talk a little bit about your HVAC system, and particularly ventilation, but also your domestic hot water? Because you talk about being pioneers in passive house construction. I know domestic hot water in multifamily buildings is still challenging for many to solve that if you're trying to go all electric. So
first I'll address what you just said on what we're looking at is New York City stormwater flood maps. So it's not like a heat map. The data sets are having to do with cloud burst and sudden water, and our sewer systems are overflowing. So to be more specific about that, but to your questions about our HVAC system, we are using a second generation passive ready PTHPs. We're using the Ice Air RSXC units, which have improved gasketing and also thermal sleeves as well. So what it does is it reduces the amount of refrigerants that you have going through your building. I'm planning also another project in Harlem where we were entered into the BOE, We want to be on the head of innovation and are doing a centralized VRF system. And now we're hitting these issues with the refrigerant phase down.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of refrigerant, a lot of, there's been balance. What is better with the PTHPs or the centralized systems? Because the issue with the PTHPs is, it's the envelope it's hard to get the R value where you have the punches through the building. So there's been that balance. So it's interesting to try to keep up with innovation and, which system is better, centralized or this. I think now with this new discussion of the refrigerant phase down for 10A to reduce, the GWP on that, is bringing up sort of pushing it to the side of these second generation PTHPs, at least currently in this government as being a really good solution. And they really have been pushing that, with the engineers of making sure that gasketing worked, because those were some of the challenges that Jack was talking about in 2018, where they've made huge advantages in, technology with the HVAC systems. So we're happy to reduce the amount of refrigerant moving up and down the building. The lines are much shorter, and they perform really great.
Do you think everyone knows about the refrigerant phase down?
Oh, do you know? Is that something that I'm referring to that you're familiar with, or that I should explain?
I sat in on a 1.5 hour session during Nessie's conference in March about it, but many of our listeners may not know. So if you want to speak about that would be good.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, the refrigerant phase down is for 421A. In fact, we've been waiting for the code to come out and to really explain what needs to be done. They're going to be replaced by A2Ls, which have a lower GWP, but they're flammable. So there's issues coming up with that, and also, if we need to ventilate them and off-gas them. So actually, nobody really has information of where we're going to land with that, but those are some of the aspects that are coming with that. As we push HVAC, people are like, oh, let's go back to hydronic systems. So, it keeps everybody looking for innovation, looking for ways, like as we try to fight and lower, global warming potential, if you're in the midst of another system, you're in this loop of innovation and you're trying to sort out, our buildings are all sorted out basically, and we need to find spaces if we need new shops and sort of very, granular things like that. I'd rather, it's perhaps too granular, but does that explain it, or on a high level?
Yes, I think so. That's again, I watched 4 very, very passionate people, let's call them passionate, talk about refrigerants for an 1.5 hours, and it's it's tough after lunch, but a lot of the people in the room were just absolutely captivated by it. But I think you did a great job. I think that's what we needed. But I wanted to go back to the question of domestic hot water, and just see what the system is there. And also, I believe, Jack, you may have mentioned a Blackwater energy recovery system, and I just wanted to explore that as well. So could whoever wants to take it just speak to those two systems?
Sure. So our domestic hot water is being used with the Blackwater source heat pump, using the piranhas, and they'll also be used for market refrigeration as well. So, the baseline before we entered the BOE was air source heat pumps. So this is the transition, and they're located in our cellar currently. So these should really add, a huge plus of, using, having the heat exchangers and being able to, capture that energy.
Nice. And I just, again, I knew maybe 3 projects in Europe who'd ever done this. So is this one of the first times in the US that anyone's using the system, or am I just not not in the know?
Out of the Blackwater loop.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not really sure where we are with the Blackwater, but I know that, obviously with a lot of the life challenge, when they're doing life challenges, these sort of systems are being used. So it's great.
Yeah.
Don't know where we are on the roster there, but forward thinking.
Well, we've talked about the mechanical systems, but I'm curious also about the assemblies. How has being in the competition or meeting the new HPD guidelines affected your assemblies? And does that feel really straightforward given the size of the building? It's not that different from how you've always been designing it, or is there a big shift for you there?
So Mary James, that's a really good question. And it has been one of the huge challenges on this project because, as we sort of explained before, is that the building was designed at a code minimum, right? And so we have a fixed lot size and fixed neighbors. So we basically were putting on a little bit of a heavier coat, so to say, because we're going to bump up our insulation everywhere. And that sort of limited the types of insulation that we could use. For example, we had a CMU backup. We have a concrete podium up to the second floor for the market hall, which is cast in place concrete. And above that, second to the 10th floors are block and plank, right? And so then we had on all our facades, on the courtyard side, on the street sides, we have the brick with a CMU backup wall. So prior we were using, rock wool, which is, a really great product, but to get in, to achieve our layouts, we are sort of limited to using XPS with our values. So that's challenging. That's going to change the dew points and all those other things. That I think has been a challenge because, the guidelines are very specific. Obviously, we're designing to maximize everything. So it's sort of a puzzle, and we know those. But if you're going through already having a building and then sort of giving it a heavier coat,
it was really challenging. One of you asked, what changes have we made since the BOE award? When we design these buildings, they are extremely prescriptive. HPD mandates dimensions to the inch. Our client, in the meantime, wants to maximize the number of units. That's their mission, and that's how they make revenue, right? So when we increase the thickness of a wall by 6 inches, 10 inches, that throws the entire planning of the building off. So one change is we redesigned the building because we couldn't fit. I mean, the units were down to the inch is what I'm trying to say. We had no buffer because we didn't anticipate passive house years ago when we first designed the building. That was one of the major changes, actually. We really had to redesign all the interior partitions, bathrooms, circulation in order to accommodate those extra. A few inches doesn't sound like a lot, but it was. When you talk about 4 walls coming in 10 inches on each end, you lose space and you lose apartments. Because HPD will not allow the construction of an apartment below a certain square footage. That we've tried, it doesn't work, they won't give a waiver, and they mean business. So we had to redesign the thing, which was tricky, difficult.
And then just speaking of walls and assemblies, I don't recall who's the window manufacturer. Have you landed on one yet, or are you still kind of
So we're using Intus Sapera 83 CW to be specific.
Your memory for figures is amazing.
Yeah, no, the Intus is a great product. We use it even on our projects that are not passive house. So
are they UPVC?
They are UPVC.
Yeah, we've been using the Intus UPVC for the last several projects. Even non-certified projects, we're gravitating towards that company. They're just all around is the best product that we have found that meets the client's budget. And we like the appearance of them and the performance. Sounds like an Intus ad.
One thing I'm really proud of though is that we have brought in the market hall into the passive house envelope. In a lot of similar projects, that's challenging and it's put outside of it. But the developers and the operators understood sort of the payback, for operating costs, creating a durable building. So that I think is a huge achievement and exciting part of the project.
And I think it contributed to our success amongst many other proposals, including the market. I think was seen as a positive move for sure.
That must be so challenging because of the variable occupancy in there, trying to plan ventilation for a space with so many people coming and going. How did you resolve that?
Well, we're still working through it to make it work. So it's definitely a challenge. And, once we get to the end, we'll tell you all our tips and tricks.
I like that.
Yeah.
That guarantees another more material for us. Cool. Well, I want to ask, and you kind of touched on this with the storm, cloudbursts and whatnot, which I find wild because I mean you're right in the middle of Manhattan, in terms of east-west. So I wouldn't think that you'd be prone to flooding, but with climate files, are you looking to the future at all just to strengthen future resiliency, even to like 2040, 2050, or are you just focusing on kind of present state?
Well, right now we're having the sustainable consultant is working through the energy model, right? So if there is certain leeway there, iterative, then that's something that we would consider to use like the summer, morphing tool. They'd have to be any of the tools that are built into the PHPP toolkit. But until we get there, as we're meeting, as you said, all these other challenges with stormwater, flooding. And again, that's a very good observation of what you said, is because we're actually, on a high, quote unquote, high point of New York City, which is quite low, and it's different than coastal flooding, right? But it's really just about the sewer system not being able to handle the amount. And we do see it much more, what we would call before 100-year rainfall, right? All this kind of deluge and flooding that we see across the world is happening more and more often, this occurrence. So our sewage systems were never designed to meet, this change in climate. And so I think a lot of weight always goes to coastal flooding, but I think even just the whole issue with stormwater, New York City is also taking on the national rules, and the unified stormwater rules are coming, which are also very, talking about climate forward, that is something that's mandated in New York City now. And we're going through a very difficult process of going through with the DEP, because they want a hierarchy of the way that you manage water. And number one on their hierarchy is to try to bring, water away from the centralized system, and to sort of already capture that and filter it through vegetative means. So that means, like, if you have a courtyard, if you don't know this situation, I do in my other project, if the ground can take that, then instead of going into the stormwater system, it will be cleaned and filtered and go directly to the ground. And if it's going back into the system, it's going to be going through a green roof, and it's going to get cleaned along the way before it gets down. At the same time, being able to, if you're making a more robust system, then you could also make it to retain water as well. So it's not being detained in just a concrete tank, but it's using those natural processes to filter and clean the water. So these are really climate forward thinking that's mandated and being implemented in New York City.
What about the fences that they want to put in?
Oh, well, there are certain things like for dry floodproofing, for example, there are certain mitigation features that need to be put in, which, if you're all familiar with that, still working out where we're going to land with the systems, but often, like in coastal flooding, worked on some of those projects where you have, and you can look at it in Whitney. If you're familiar with New York City, I know we're sort of speaking a little bit local, and this is for everyone, but if you do come to New York City and you come to the Whitney Museum and you come on a wet day, you will see it's a deployable flood barrier system. So basically you're building walls around the building, you're lifting the critical infrastructure, all the MEP systems above where it would flood. And that would be a dry floodproofing, mitigation plan.
They're temporary, aren't they?
Yeah, they're temporary. So you put them up just the way, basically they're fancy sandbags.
And this is the Whitney on the, where is it? Like 70. I used to know this just off the top of my head. It's by my mother-in-law's apartment. But it's the Whitney and on the Upper East Side.
No, it's the Whitney. Actually, it's just
it's their new location on they're
like at 12th Street, West 12th Street.
Yeah.
by Chelsea
Like the West Village
and West
Okay.
Village.
and the Hudson River.
See, I leave for a couple years and everything changes. The Whitney moves and
Yeah, it went from uptown to downtown.
yeah.
It's right on the High Line, so it's really
Oh,
great.
okay.
Yeah.
Got it. That's really cool. And I've learned since the last time we talked, I learned a thing or two about flooding because Asheville, of course, got washed away, but that was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess where was I going with that? I don't know. I'm just
I
rambling.
I was just going to jump in here and say, I was reading a article, I live in California and where we do get periodically hit by atmospheric rivers, but I was just reading an article recently where they said the West Coast is not alone in experiencing atmospheric rivers. It's just that the term hasn't been applied that much to East Coast experiences, weather events. But yes, stormwater management is, I hadn't really thought about it, but it makes sense that that's a huge deal going forward. And just one more challenge that as architects you have to deal with. And just in closing off here, are there any other features that we haven't addressed that you were either challenged by or really excited to bring into the project that we haven't covered yet?
One thing that comes to mind was the design of the market itself. Beyond the fact that it's indoors and it's flooded with light and that they can sell 12 hours a day, 12 months a day, is I came to the conclusion of humility, which we're not always known for, us architects. And we spent time at the market, the open air market. And here we are, American-born, rather privileged people designing for African merchants, right? And for me, that's, a challenge. I mean, we're doing it, but we're doing it with empathy and a certain degree of humility because that's not our experience, right? So it led us to believe that the market design is simply a vessel. It is bare concrete. It is lofty. It's got 20-foot ceilings, but it's all this kind of rough-hewn concrete that you might not see in other kind of merchandising or retail environments. And we did that to tone down what we are doing, to say, listen, what's beautiful here are the fabrics, the patterns, the beautiful wood, the drums, the music, and to play down the architecture to be simply a vessel, a rather neutral vessel, as grand as it might be, for what's really happening, which is African culture, West African culture, which is gorgeous, celebratory, authentic, indigenous, and we can't compete with that. Now, I'm getting beyond sustainability, but I look on sustainability as a very broad, yes, it's about green roofs and passive, but it's also about the survivability of culture and neighborhoods and cities, which I'm completely devoted to. I've lived in New York, I've been practicing for 49 years because of our passion for the city. And cities being such sustainable entities in and of themselves, to enhance and strengthen neighborhoods is what we're all about. So that attitude really informed the entire design of the market in a place of humility that I don't always encounter, but because we're always trying to do something, in and of itself beautiful and architectonic and meaningful. And for us to step aside and say the meaning is of the color, and we hit it right. I think it's going to be fantastic when it's built, and it will remain an African market, not some architectural gesture of ego or whatever. So I don't know if that answers any of your questions, but it was an important thing for us to talk about. It's an attitude we don't always necessarily take, and I think it's the right one. So.
And I do think that was wonderful about NYSERDA's Buildings of Excellence is that they are marrying. I think that, all buildings should become passive house. I think all buildings should be stewards of the environment. I don't think that these things should be broken down into niche, I really look forward to the day when there is no special term passive house because we all build that way. And
Yeah, and beyond. We don't know what's coming in 10, 20 years,
Yeah.
in addition to the current features. Yeah, we as stewards of the earth, we've got to do more. So it's our mission to put that forward.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing the building when it's built. I mean, as I said, you're taking on so many challenges and pulling them into preserving, as you said, the community of people who have been occupying this space and,
Yeah.
creating a way for them to still occupy the space and yet also provide housing. So it's just, you're really weaving together such a great number of issues in this one project.
Thank you, Mary. It's what we thrive on. Many of our projects, by the way, are multi-use. Housing and education or culture or any number of things that are social problems in the city. More and more, our projects are mixed use. And that thrills us because housing is not the only problem in the city, especially in our outlying underserved communities. So, and we are partnering with the city in that mission. It's thrilling, actually.
That's fantastic to hear. I'm kind of curious. I want to ask about other projects going on, but I know we're short on time here, so maybe we'll have to do that with another
We'll
project.
do another one. We'll do another one.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us and hop on the
Of course.
podcast. And yeah, we look forward to speaking again.
Okay, that was Lisette Wong and Jack Esterson of Think. Thank you very much, Jay and Mary, for that excellent interview. What did you, what takeaways do you want to start with? Maybe we'll start with Mary.
Well, it's just a really exciting project with some unique challenges. Just bringing the marketplace into the passive house envelope, that's a big stretch. As they mentioned, most projects that have anything similar have excluded the community spaces, the more challenging community spaces from the passive house envelope, but they're including it. So it's very ambitious and a good call out to buildings of excellence and the inspiration and motivation that entering into that competition was for them.
Yeah, good point. And this is a great moment to mention that NYSERDA is having its Buildings of Excellence Round 5 award ceremony next week on June 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we're going to be, quote unquote, broadcasting that live via a Zoom webinar. So people can catch the latest and greatest of that program and some really exciting projects that will be highlighted there during that ceremony. So, and we'll say a little bit more about that in the events announcement. But Jay, what did you have to take away from that?
The takeaway, I think, beyond the passive house, element of it, I think they really like their green space. And I think there's this great idea of kind of, they have it's a podium construction with 2 towers. And sometimes when you do that, towers can literally be like silos, and people don't kind of communicate. And they decided to create this green space on the roof of the market, but below the 2 towers, where people can kind of intermingle and mix. And I just think that's a really good way to pull the community together. I don't know if I've seen it that often, so that was a really cool part. Yeah, that's the first thing that jumps out to me. Obviously, the engineering and the architecture is really cool, but I think that's as a person of the soft sciences, I always like to hear stuff like that.
Yeah. As another person of the soft sciences, I also enjoyed hearing the story about HPD's evolution in terms of its kind of understanding of and embrace of Passive House. And I mean, I think even 9 years ago, there were leaders within HPD who got it and who were very supportive. But to see the institutional evolution happen, and the now the kind of stronger institutional support for Passive House in HPD's work is cool to see, and a reminder of the kind of change that can happen in a relatively short amount of time. I thought that was really encouraging. And another reminder also of the alignment between the benefits of Passive House and the mission of affordable housing providers as well. Another, speaking of evolution, was the conversation that you had about the refrigerants and the changing nature of all of that, and the way that is starting to change thinking about design of mechanical systems and approaching heating and cooling. And just again, another reminder of how dynamic this whole world is of decarbonization, with all these different moving, and evolving kind of trend lines and understandings. Like, it just seems like a few years ago that we really truly became fully aware of the impact of refrigerants, and already that impact hopefully will be trending down over time as the most egregious GWP offenders are phased out. And then that raises questions about how then do you approach other elements of the building, and how's that related to hopefully the decarbonization of the electrical grid as well. It's just a super interesting group of kind of variables that architects and engineers are needing to grapple with.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I thought it was interesting that Harlem is the highest heat index in Manhattan, and then also the stormwater management that they have to deal with, looking forward to greater likelihood of flooding. It's some of the new challenges that architects have to deal with, in addition to all the other regular challenges they're dealing with and pulling together in their designs and beefing up their envelopes to meet Passive House and everything else. It's definitely a changing pattern of what they have to think about.
Yeah, excellent point, Mary. Well, Mary and Jay, thank you again for this excellent interview and such a interesting and important project with lots of important and intense history and really great community building and future building. So it'll be really fun to watch it develop and see it built coming next year.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see anything that we cover go from design to actually being constructed. But it's especially exciting with NYSERDA projects because they hopefully kind of accelerate the adoption of some like newer technologies and building techniques. So yeah, it's really great to see these actually like happening.
Indeed, and that's a great segue to one of our event announcements again, and that's the Buildings of Excellence Round 5 awards ceremony that's happening online on Tuesday, June 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And you can go to the Passive House Accelerator website to register and take that in via Zoom. We also have, of course, this week, a couple of one extremely important and exciting event, and that is Reimagine Buildings 25 on Thursday, June 12th, and that's Friday, June 13th, if you're in New Zealand and Australia. As I said, Matthew will be hosting the third segment, the future segment of the conference. And as we learned from Kim, it's a really exciting program. So again, you can go to PassiveHouseAccelerator.com to get linked up to registration for that conference, and we hope to see you there. I'm going backwards here in time, but on Wednesday, June 11th, the day before the conference, we have a episode of the Passive House Accelerator live show with, it's a project of the month called What's Next After Passive House, and it features Bryn Davidson of Lane Fab up in Vancouver, BC. So be sure to check that out too if you are free then. All right. All right. Well, keep up the good work. These interviews are awesome. So we appreciate you sharing these stories with everybody. Have a good one.